Thanks, Addie. Thanks, worship team. Doing a great job at all that this morning. Really do appreciate it. So begin with a question today, and that is, what do you worship? What or who do you worship? Now, I know you're in church, and you think, well, the obvious answer is Mark, Jesus, and very good. You got the Bible answer down, good. But I really don't care about having the intellectual answer correct. I want to know the truth about your life. Or better yet, I want you to know the truth about your life. I looked up the definition of worship because it seems like we only use that word in the context of church. So what's it mean? It means reverent love and devotion, great regard, extravagant respect, something seen as sacred. So you might say worship is something that envelops all of a person, that they invest themselves completely into something. And I think that is something that I encountered a few weeks ago with Greg. It went back a couple months ago. I said, Greg, there's this awesome event coming to St. Louis. You got to go with me. It's called the Royal Rumble. And so it's a wrestling event for those of you unfamiliar with it. And so 44,000 of us gathered into the Dome in downtown St. Louis, and this is where our seats were. And don't be fooled by this terrible iPhone picture. They were good seats. Like, you could see everything that took place. We weren't near as close as the people spending thousands of dollars on tickets, but we were very happy with it. And what are some of the things we saw at this event? We saw this awesome highlight move right here. Just so you know, it did not work out for the guy in the air. Okay, this did not go in his favor. And then we had this where he threw him through a table, which it's not a wrestling event if somebody doesn't go through a table. You remember going down, we'd see him get launched through tables and everything too. And so this is not new, but it's a classic. We saw Ronda Rousey there is hanging upside down. She's actually pulling her out over the top rope, which is what you want to do in the Royal Rumble. Worked out pretty good for her. And so that was pretty exciting. And then we see Ricochet, who is going to ricochet off of the other large gentleman there. And so that was pretty exciting to watch. Oh, and then we saw a one-handed overhead press. Greg he stayed up here. He's going to do this to me. So Greg, if you want to come on over here. I'm kidding. He's not going to do that. Break your arm. And all right, so let's keep going on. And then the the Royal Rumble was eventually won by Brock Lesnar, who's going to WrestleMania, hence the sign up there. Now, I did not take those pictures. That came from WWE's website. So, but anyway, it was a great event, and we had a good time. And to see how the people reacted to the wrestlers was incredible. I would say for some of the people there, it was a worshipful experience. And I mean that in completely genuine as I can be. It was a worshipful experience, the way that they expressed themselves. In fact, they had a lot more enthusiasm about what was going on in the Dome than happens in a lot of churches on any given Sunday morning. But I noticed one of the things that really invigorated people to express themselves was entrance music. You know, whenever a music song would start to tell what wrestler was coming down the aisle, 44,000 people in unison would cheer, or they would boo. And there was just no middle ground. There was no, whatever, I don't care about him or her. There was just complete enthusiasm one way or the other. So Greg came up with this idea. He said, Mark, what if you had entrance music before you preached? I said, Greg, that sounds like a great idea. I said, but what would it be based on? He goes, what if we based an entrance song on your preaching style? Like, I didn't know I had a preaching style. He goes, no, you do. And I've come up with the perfect song. And so that's why Greg is still here. And Greg, you are going to give me entrance music today.
Yeah. So one thing you got to consider is I considered his life's work in the ministry when I came up with this.
You want me to go back here and walk in, like entrance?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do this. You're also fired. Just say that. You're good. You go and go sit down. That's ridiculous. All right, so we couldn't come up with a good entrance song, but I thought about putting on a wig and nose and everything like that. We're good. We'll keep it moving along. But no, it really was a worshipful experience for those that were completely invested in the wrestling event. Now, I've enjoyed wrestling over the years. I don't follow it near as close now as I used to. And so maybe when I was younger, you might say I worshipped it to some extent. But there's a couple images from the event, one from WWE.com, the other from my phone. And it will kind of demonstrate how I saw it as a worship experience. So here's the first one. This is Seth Rollins there in the black with his arms outstretched. He made his entrance through the audience, which is always a neat thing. It doesn't happen very often. Especially since COVID, and they've only done live audiences the last few months. And so he made his entrance through the crowd. And if you look at what's going on there, you see a lot of phones held up, but you see a lot of hands with that. That's one of his moves that they like to do there. And all the arms are raised, though. Almost everybody has their arms raised with excitement for Seth Rollins. That looks a lot like worship to me. There is complete enthusiasm. It was deafening how loud people would cheer for these various people. The second one comes from our seats, right? We were in the front row of the upper deck, and there was a walkway landing in front of us. And there was a young man in front of us who was extremely enthusiastic about everything that took place. The popcorn vendor came by. He was excited. I mean, he was totally invested. And so you see him there with his hand raised. And he was pumped up about every moment of that event. And when he disagreed with someone, 2 middle fingers flying up in the air. And he would let him know about it. When he was excited for something, he was jumping and spinning in circles. I've never seen anything like it. He looked like an Olympic athlete, just bouncing all around all over the place. Just completely sold out to every moment of that 3.5-hour event. It was a worshipful experience for so many. And I just got thinking about it, it's easy to judge them. The line to buy the gear that you wear, oh my goodness, the lines were long. And then they had a special store. Greg and I thought about going in there, and we looked at it, and they had replica championship belts. Now, you don't have to watch wrestling to understand. The champion wears a belt. It's a big belt that goes around your waist. It's about yay big, and it's made of leather, and it's supposed to be gold, whatever, I don't know. But they make replica ones that people can own. Now, I understand that, because when I was a kid, Dad took me to my first wrestling event when I was 5 or 6. He bought me one of those replica belts. It was made of foam and plastic. Probably cost us $15, which at that time would have been astronomical, but Dad was extremely generous and got that belt for me, and I had it for years. Well, now these are made of real leather and real metal, and they look like the real belts. And my first thought was, I would like to have one of those. The cheapest belt I found was $180. The most expensive was about $430. And they ranged everywhere in between. And you say, well, who could afford that? Well, apparently most of St. Louis could afford that, because every other person had at least one belt. Several people had 2 belts. There were couples like arm in arm. Each of them had their own belt. There was one guy who was carrying 3 belts, one on each arm and one around his neck. No exaggeration. I'm like, these people were dropping thousands of dollars between tickets, concessions, and merchandise. That sounds a lot like worship to me. Now, if you have an expensive Cardinals poster or baseball bat that's been signed and hanging in your, and it's worth this, are you worshiping them? Well, maybe. That's something you need to ask yourself. But that's just the impression I walked away with. Because worship is important to consider in our lives, because worship involves time. Well, we had to leave at 5 o'clock or so, or a little bit earlier, to get down there and fight the traffic, find the parking, get in, find our seats. I mean, I didn't get home till midnight, and then he had the drive yet further, and so it's a big commitment just to get to the event. Money, our seats were cheap compared to everybody else. They were in the double digits. We didn't hit the triple digits, but a lot of people did on their money and more. It involves time, money, energy. It involves focus. It involves what you think about. It involves your attitude, your passion. Your worship is centered in everything that you do. And for some of these people, wrestling was a lifestyle. Now, your lifestyle might not be wrestling, but I bet you have something that involves a lot of time, money, energy, and focus, and I bet it's not always God. I bet it might be something else. What would it be? Well, only you can answer that question for you, but it comes down to this very important principle, and that is you are what you worship. You are what you worship. What is it you worship in life? And I know what you're wanting to say. You're wanting to say, well, I only worship God. Well, I wish that were true for all of us, but the reality is it's not, because we're sinful and we're fallen. In fact, I think it was Kyle Idleman who pegged it. He said basically every sin goes down to idolatry. Every sin that we commit in life is the idea that we're saying, well, I know what God says, but I want to do this anyway. You're making it more important than God. In a sense, we are worshiping something else. So where is your allegiance? Where is your loyalty? Where is your passion in life? And you know what it's like to be passionate about a restaurant? You got to go eat there. You know what it's like to be excited about a movie? You have to watch this. You know what it's like to be emphatic about a band? You got to listen to them. They're the best thing ever. And you get so excited about these things in life. When was the last time that was your conversation about God? You got to meet Jesus. He's changed me. Now, if you're a little uncomfortable, that's okay. I'm uncomfortable too. It's easy to get passionate about the things of this world that are temporary, but it's time we develop a worshipful attitude that completely baptizes us in Jesus, where He is at the front of our minds and the center of our conversations. The worship-centered question I want to ask you this morning is simply this: what matters most to me? Worship is about what matters most to me. And you might say, well, Mark, I showed up this morning. I sang the songs. I took communion. I put something in the offering plate. You can't tell me I'm not worshiping. I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking you to do a self-evaluation. I'm asking you to do an inventory. But anybody can look good on the outside. Worship is the matter of the heart. Worship is a matter of the heart. You know, the Bible says about communion that if you take communion in an unworthy manner, meaning you have not examined your life, if you have not looked to see where you need to improve, and that you're not grateful for the grace of Jesus, then you are not in a good mindset to take it. Yet, how many Sundays has communion been taken by Christians all around the world? Because they don't want their neighbor noticing they're not taking communion. They don't want someone to look down on them. Oh, they're going to think bad of me if I don't take it. So they take it to put on a good appearance. I can tell you, this is not a brag point at all. Maybe it's embarrassing. There's been a lot of Sundays I haven't taken communion on this front row because my heart, my mind was just distracted. Maybe not a bad thing, but I'm thinking about the PowerPoint. Is it right? Oh, what did I add that picture? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, did I have that transition set? My mind's not where it needs to be. Time out. Time out. We don't take communion to look good. We take it to remember the sacrifice of Jesus and to do a self-inventory. And so you can do the right things. You can have your lips move and your sounds come out, and you can put something in the offering plate, but that's outward. Worship is a matter of the heart, and you are what you worship. So why are you here? Are you here to worship, or is it for another reason? Because I think there's a lot of Christians in churches all around the world that are here for other reasons. And I'm not judging you. I'm glad that people are in church, even if it's for other reasons, because I hope they get something good out of it. But I think here's a really simple example to use. Missy and I were 15 years old when we started dating. Our first date was a blind date on a Saturday night to the high school dance, homecoming dance at her school. And we decided that very night, all right, we're going to start dating. And so I said, hey, you want to go to church with me tomorrow? And she said, sure. Now, her family didn't go to church at that time. That wasn't a common practice in their household, hadn't been for years. And so the next day she went to church with me. Do you think she went to church with me because she's like, oh, I get to meet Jesus today? No, she gets to sit next to her boyfriend during church. That's why she wanted to go. Now, obviously, that has changed over the years. She has a different attitude, a different mindset. She has a great service heart for the church. These are good things that have developed. But the reason she was there was first and foremost, if you would say, selfish on a very base level. There's another person I knew that she was very involved in church, started dating someone. They got together and they got engaged. He became very involved in the church, very, very active. Things were going great. They got married. Shortly thereafter, he sent her a text, hey, I'm glad church is going great for you and all, but it's really not my thing. He used church to get what he wanted, but then he had no interest in follow through. So I don't know what it is for you. I don't know if you're here because of family obligation. I don't know if you're here because it's just the routine of what you do, if you don't want to look bad for being absent, or if you genuinely are looking for an opportunity to connect to God through worship, I'm asking you to evaluate where you are. Evaluate your worship, because you are what you worship. And if it's about the appearance to those around you, then you are worshiping yourself in some capacity. Again, no judgment from me. I don't know what's going on in your heart, but God does. And it would do us well to honestly pry into our heart so we know what's going on and we can address whatever is wrong. We're looking at Daniel chapter 3 today, and we're getting ready to encounter a difficult episode in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But before we do, throughout biblical history, and in fact all of world history, there have been three major gods that have been worshipped. I would call these gods the unholy trinity. That is not original with me. That comes from Chris Hodges in his book, The Daniel Dilemma. And I want to look at that unholy trinity with you right now. The first one is Mammon. Mammon. Mammon is the god of wealth and possession. And so this is a god that would have been worshipped in order to help gain prosperity in your life. Now, we may not worship the god of Mammon in America today, but there is definitely a lot of worship of wealth and prosperity or having more possessions. That doesn't take a great amount of imagination to figure out. And this has gone on through all of human history. This god has been worshipped in a variety of ways. Now, I like how Chris Hodges put it. He said it's okay to have money as long as money doesn't have you. And so wealth isn't the issue. Stuff isn't the issue. It's the pursuit, the heart of the matter that makes the difference. The second one is the god Baal. Baal is the god of pride and selfishness and self-sufficiency. And in fact, Baal was seen as the king of the gods, much like you call Zeus the king of the gods. This was the same type of god, full of arrogance and self-sufficiency. The name means owner or lord. And so we live in that age about self-sufficiency and self-righteousness, self-happiness. Pursue what makes you happy. You do you is one of the popular phrases today. And you just do what feels good for you. Well, that's the god of Baal at work in the lives of people today. And then there's the goddess Asherah. She is the goddess of fertility and or sexual pleasure. And of course, turn on any TV show, read any book, watch anything, hear anything, and this is going to be a very common theme. So it comes down to money, power, and sex. Those three things, those three gods, were issues that the Israelites struggled with, that the neighbors of the Israelites struggled with, and they continue to impact the entire world to this very day. We give them different names. Nobody, if you asked around today, do you worship the god of Mammon? I don't know what that is or who that is, so I would say no. Well, a lot of people worship that god and aren't even aware of it. It still goes back to the question, what matters most to me? If we were honest, I would assume at some point all of us have been guilty of worshiping one of these gods or another. So as we consider a life of endurance, let's go to Daniel chapter 3, picking it up in the first verse. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 90 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. I do think I need to pause there real quick. 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide. He has to be the most square-shaped man in history, right? Well, no, probably what it is was there was like a 90-foot wide pedestal that this image was set up on. So the actual image of Nebuchadnezzar was probably not 90 feet square. So just give you an idea if you're trying to picture this in your head. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. And so they all show up to the dedication, which is what you would do. When the king summons you, you show up. It's not really I got an appointment at 3:30, sorry. No, you show up when the king calls you. And so they all show up, and it says they stood before it. Skipping down to verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O people, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all other kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard all of these sounds, nations and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. King Nebuchadnezzar. What convinced him to set up an image to be worshipped of himself? Was it bad advice? Was it the fact that being king had gone to his head? I don't know. But the reality is he began worshiping the god of Baal, pride, self-sufficiency. I'm such a good king. I'm a god, and I'm worthy of people's worship. That was the attitude that King Nebuchadnezzar developed. Now, here's the question that I would ask that might be more relevant to us today, and that is, what do you do when the government penalizes you or criminalizes worship? What do you do when the government says this type of Christianity is not allowed? This type of action is illegal. This type of action cannot take place anymore. You may say, well, Mark, that doesn't really happen except in places like China, and it's happened in Rwanda, and parts of India, and Indonesia. It doesn't happen in the Western developed countries. I don't know if you are familiar with who this lady is. Most of you probably don't know. Her name, and I'm going to probably butcher it, so I apologize, is Päivi Räsänen. She is a minister, a former minister of parliament, the minister of the interior in the country of Finland. When I say minister, that just kind of refers to an official position. And today, actually this very week, she is going through a trial right now in Finland for the crime of posting a Bible verse on Twitter. Now you say, there's got to be more to it. Well, a little bit, but not much. The Western European countries have passed laws about not agitating various people groups. So if there are marginalized or other people groups that are considered at risk, you're not allowed to agitate them. And she, in Finland, there's a state church. It's the Lutheran Church. There's also a non-state Lutheran church, but like there's 5.5 million people in Finland, 4.5 million go to the state church. So there's one major church. And the Lutheran Church sponsored the week's Pride event. Now, I don't care what your personal opinion is on that or not, but she quoted Romans chapter 1 towards the church and said, hey, that says this type of behavior is immoral, it is sinful, and the church should not be sponsoring it. That was her opinion that she shared with her church through Twitter. And somehow it got passed up the chain into government, and she was sued and now is facing up to 2 years in prison for posting that Bible verse on Twitter for attacking a marginalized group. Now, there are a few more details wrapped in it, but that is the old, there's not like a hidden agenda here in terms of, well, she was actually murdering people on the side, but they're using this as, no, like this is really what it boils down to. She wrote a pamphlet on marriage between a man and a woman back in 2004. She was part of a panel discussion in 2018, and then she posted this Bible verse, I think it's 2019 or 2020. So it hasn't been very long. And so they are digging up everything they can to put her out of business as best they can, to put her in prison. When I interviewed about this, she said, I've heard about this kind of stuff in the Soviet Union, but I would have never expected it in Finland. In fact, I pulled a quote off of an article I'd like to read for you. It says, if she weren't a symbol of faith, of the faith most despised by the world's principalities, Räsänen would be an international symbol of peak female accomplishment. A medical doctor, a pastor's wife, multilingual member of parliament, author, public speaker, and 4-year minister of her country's interior, who has also successfully raised 5 loving children in a strong marriage, she epitomizes womanly achievement. If she didn't champion orthodox Christian beliefs, Räsänen would be the kind of woman put on the cover of magazines and given her own TV talk show. Yet because she dares to say that there is a standard of right and wrong found in God's word, she is on trial this very day. Now, there's a principle at play that you need to know about. I don't get into politics much, and I don't intend to. But whatever happens in the Western European countries always migrates to the United States. It happens every time. Every progressive policy they take in place comes to the U.S. Now, some might be to the benefit of our country. But in this particular case, this is going to be a serious restriction on the free practice of religion. And it may not happen next year. It may not happen even in 10 years. But we've seen it happen in some ways. Bakers and florists and photographers being sued. The Jack Phillips baker issue from Colorado. People say, oh, he wouldn't bake a cake for a gay wedding. That's not true. He said he would bake the cake. He said he wouldn't decorate it with certain symbols. And because of that, he was almost put out of business. We have a serious problem that is going to come our way. And the question is, when the government, like King Nebuchadnezzar, puts up restrictions that prevents us to freely worship and practice God and to read his word as openly as we should, are we prepared to deal with it? And I don't think most Christians in the United States are. She said this: in our country, it seems you're allowed in your mind to agree with the Bible, but you're not allowed to state it publicly. Well, that attitude's already been adopted in our country. Well, faith is a private matter. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about politics and religion. I don't care if you talk about politics, but religion's the one thing you absolutely have to talk about, because that's the only thing that matters at the end of the day. At the end of the day, if it's not a relationship with Jesus that matters, nothing really matters. The question is, how do we develop endurance, the ability to have endurance and perseverance in the face of such hostility? It's three very simple points to you. Number one, be resolved. We talked about this last week, so we're not going to deep dive on it today. But we need to decide before the dilemma. We need to make a decision to say, I will honor God regardless of the consequences. And that's easy to say when there are no consequences. But the consequences have shown up in some ways, and they will continue to show up. And so we need to be prepared to set our feet, to square our shoulders, and say, we will face whatever it is head on. In Psalm 119, verse 11, it says, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you, O God. That is exactly the attitude we have to adopt. The problem is most people aren't resolved. They're squeamish. They change their opinion when it's convenient. You know, we saw that with Senator Rob Portman from Texas. He was one of the ones who helped put the Defense of Marriage Act together a couple decades ago, supporting that marriage between man and woman. And then his son came out in 2013 as being gay, and so he changed his stance on it, and it was the first Republican senator to support the Marriage Equality Act that would be recognized by the federal government. Now, I can't imagine how difficult it must be to wrestle with an issue inside your own family like that, especially when you come from a conservative family. And I'm sure it rocks the foundation of your family, and there's a lot of questions. You know, how do we handle this? Do we go to the wedding? Do we get together for family functions? Like, do we act like nothing's wrong? Like, how do we deal with this? I can't imagine. And so I have no judgment on anybody who struggles with how to respond to these situations. But I know that the right answer is not to change our stance on what God's Word says to make it convenient for our families. That's just not something that we can do. Now, I'm all for loving everybody. You know, people say, I want a church that welcomes all people. Well, welcome to Crestwood Christian Church. We welcome all people. But we don't condone all behavior because God's Word doesn't. Do we welcome alcoholics? Absolutely. Do we welcome drug users? You bet. Do we welcome liars? Sure. We welcome absolutely everybody. But I refuse to lie to you to make you feel good. I want to tell you the truth of God's Word so you can better square your life to His will, and so you can live a more complete and full life according to His standard. That's what it means to be resolved, to stand up for the truth regardless of the consequences. So I don't know what baggage you bring coming into church. I know I've got baggage. I know there's a lot of Sundays I feel like nothing more than a hypocrite just standing here trying to share God's Word with you. But I still need to be resolved to stand up for what's right, even when I fail to meet that standard at times. And hopefully you can as well. If we're going to have endurance, we also have to embrace opportunities. We have to embrace opportunities. When Paul was in prison, he used it as an opportunity to preach to the guards. He preached to Felix. He preached to all the rulers in front of him. And in fact, one of them was like, are you trying to convert me already? And Paul said, I wish I could right now. We saw this passion approach from Paul that everywhere he would be an opportunity to share Jesus. And we see it with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They get hauled in before King Nebuchadnezzar because they refuse to bow down and worship the golden image. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, look, I'm going to play all these instruments again, and I'm going to give you another chance. Now the king, that's pretty generous. He doesn't have to do that. But they are officials that have his respect. And so he says, I'm going to give you a chance to do over, and then you can be free and good to go. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego use that moment. They use that opportunity to preach. So let me go ahead and go there in Daniel chapter 3 and see what it says here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king. This is down in verse 16. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Those are fighting words. All right, the king's not going to like that. We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, The God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. What an opportunity to preach. King Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're the king? You think you're in charge of our lives? No, God's in charge and he can save us. And then they make this really interesting statement. It says, if we are thrown in the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand. Does that mean they knew what the end result of this story was going to be? I don't think so. I think they're looking ahead saying, we're going to be rescued because we're going to be with him. What's Paul saying? To be absent from the body is to be at home with the Lord. I think they've realized that you kill us, you just put us with God, and we're good. What an attitude to have. What a way to embrace an opportunity to share a message. And that's exactly what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. Pavi Rasanen, who we talked about from Finland just a few minutes ago, she said that the police have come to her home. They've given her documents. Renounce everything you have said about your faith, about what you've said about the marriage, and you'll be good to go. And of course, she's refused to do it. And she's used the opportunity to preach to every police officer who's walked into her house. She says, I've had more opportunities now to share Jesus than I've ever had in my life. And she's excited for the privilege of sharing Jesus. I'm sure she wishes she wasn't on trial and going through this. I don't think any Christian should go out of their way to try to be persecuted. I don't think the Bible gives us any kind of indication that that's right. But we don't flee from it when it happens. And that's the last point. We have to learn to endure hardships. We have to learn to endure hardships. Nebuchadnezzar was furious with them, and his attitude toward them changed. Time to endure some hardships. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and have these men thrown into the blazing furnace. In fact, the furnace was so hot that the soldiers who threw them into the furnace died from the heat. So that tells you how hot it was. That tells you how difficult it was. We will have to endure hardships in life. We should not go out of our way to create hardships, but when they happen, we need to endure them. The book of Daniel is about how to stand firm and love well. I can get up here and tell you, well, the Bible says this is wrong, don't do it. But I also got to learn to say it in a loving way that is kind and compassionate, especially in a one-on-one conversation. It's easy to tell someone they're wrong. It's a whole other way to say it in a way that lets them know you care about them and you love them. We need to endure hardships by standing firm and loving well. And how do we endure hardships? Ultimately, we endure hardships by remembering God promises to go through it with us. King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw in the furnace? Certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods. Most scholars believe it was Jesus. Jesus was with them in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So they did. They came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. That's the decision we have to make. That's the decision we have to stand up and ultimately make. Therefore, this is King Nebuchadnezzar speaking, I decree that the people of any nation or language who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, their houses turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. So now Nebuchadnezzar goes from nobody can worship any God but me to you can't speak against their God or you die. I don't anticipate that change happening in the West anytime soon, but my goodness, when you will stand up and develop endurance, it can have some amazing effects to those around you. Last verse. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So as the worship team joins me, this is a great story. It ends so well. We should be excited. But sometimes in life, it doesn't end that well. At least not in a physical sense. Sometimes in life, we meet our end and we meet Jesus sooner than we would like. So we think. But if we're worshiping God, if that is the center of our heart and our minds, if that is what we're truly worshiping in life, then we should look forward to nothing more than the day we meet Him. And if we knew it was going to be today, we would be the most excited people the world has ever seen. We need endurance in life. We need to be resolved. We need to embrace opportunities, and we need to endure hardships. Not only so that one day we get to meet Jesus, but so that others might have the opportunity to do the same. This morning, if you have not made that decision to put Jesus first, if you have not made that decision to be resolved to set Him apart from everything else, you have the opportunity to do that and worship Him completely by giving your life over to Him this morning, by meeting me down front as we stand and as we sing.